Materials supplied by Microsoft Corporation may be used for internal review, analysis, or research only. Any editing, reproduction, publication, rebroadcast, public showing, internet, or public display is forbidden and may violate copyright law.
All right, thank you for coming. This is mostly for purposes of recording. Thank you all for being here, especially those of you who came from the world outside this building, all the way over here and joined us, especially some of you came from other parts of the world entirely, so thank you even more. I'm Nancy Boehm, and we're happy today to have Devin Desai visiting from the Jefferson School of Law in California.
San Diego.
San Diego, thank you. And he's going to be talking about 3D printing and patents. And I will hand it over to you.
Great.
I should say there will be time for questions throughout, so feel free to interrupt. And also we will have some snacks and refreshments afterwards, so please feel free to stick around and chat further.
Great.
Over to you.
Thank you. Well, of course, thank you to Microsoft Research, and Nancy has been a tremendous host in the last couple days. I've been thrilled to grab a whole bunch of ideas from folks here, so it's, I guess, my turn to try and give back a little. It is a work in progress, so absolutely, as she said, questions, thoughts at any point are very much appreciated. And with that, I'll get into hopefully some substance. So Michelangelo allegedly said that he made statues by just removing the parts of the statue that hid the sculpture. And while much of what is manufactured today comes from that sort of subtractive method, 3D printers are applying the opposite principle. They're building items up layer by layer. And the devices can be seen as part of a broader movement, the maker movement, that tries to empower people to design and produce customized objects in their home or business. Now, there are some parallels to copyright policy that will likely apply to 3D printing, and those come from the VCR. But I want to be very clear that the technology that 3D printing resembles is another general purpose device that we all know, and that's the personal computer. So as a little bit of road mapping, I will first cover the basics of 3D printing and hopefully make the case that it is, in fact, a general purpose technology, which is important when we start to get to the patent law behind it. Second, I will go into some economic implications of 3D printing, and I'll talk about the gun issue, but not necessarily as a public safety issue, but also to reveal that it shows why patents will pose such a big, run into such a big problem with 3D printing. And then I'll get to some of the legal issues and possibly propose some solutions, but depending on time, we might be just kicking that around at the end. So some mechanics. I know I said PC, but I actually first want you to think about a different thing, the peripheral that we all know called the printer. 3D printers are, in fact, modeled on the desktop printer that we know, and they operate along very similar lines. It is, as I said, an additive process, and it involves squirting molten plastic in some cases, or targeting a laser to harden layers of powder or liquid resin, or sometimes they can shape other materials such as metal. Believe it or not, cake frosting has been tried, and living cells, and they then make an object. Now the raw material is basically set in a 2D pattern, and then layer on layer on layer until you get your three-dimensional object. That's a rough, quick and ready of the hardware, and here's a couple pictures of what they are. These are both, let's see. Sometimes it just freezes. Hold on a moment. Let's try this. Good. Open source. Notice the design itself. People go in, they tinker, they mess with this quite a bit. I'm not going to get too deep into that, but just there you go. There is a software component. The patterns and adjustments of these machines are controlled by often open source software, part of the computer-aided design world. And often these can be downloaded for free, and an example of this would be the website Thingiverse. But producing a design from scratch is not that difficult. 3D modeling programs allow people to draw what they want and make what they want, and in fact, high schoolers are doing this. For example, the Fab Lab project, which started just next door at MIT, has a branch in San Diego, and in Fab Lab San Diego works with K through 12 students, and they are doing great jobs where, for one example, is they make limbs and torsos, and then they learn how to make an Arduino or controller, put it together, and get a robot that actuates. So at one level, it's very easy. They're also learning programming, math. They get very excited. They are willing to go solve new problems that they may not tackle otherwise just because they're having fun. But suppose you're like me, right? The unfrozen caveman lawyer. I can't design or draw to save my life. There's hope here, too. We now have 3D scanners. These bring science fiction to life. They're using lasers and cameras to capture the contours of an object and turn it into the design file. There's other software that allows you to use just a simple digital camera. If you take 20 or 30 pictures, maybe a little more to get every angle of the object, you can upload it. It will be turned into the design file. You easily download it, all open source and free. It's called 123D. And then there's another software program called Blender that you can then take it to clean up the noise and then again print. In short, almost anyone might be able to use 3D printing technology, which then takes us to some economics. Not deep economics, but really how is it being used out in the field. 3D printing is poised to alter and change manufacturing sectors of the economy. Just as the PC put the power of digitization into the hands of everyone so that copying and distribution costs were no longer barriers protecting the copyright industry's business models of the late 20th century, 3D printing promises to put the power of digitized things into almost anyone's hands.
Question.
Go for it.
The hardware might not be that easy to make. And
Correct.
at the beginning of the copier, actually, some industry partners controlled sort of the hardware and that way controlled actually printing copies. Right?
Absolutely correct. That is possible. Right now it has been essentially open source, but as some of our audience knows more than I, there is a little fight brewing over that. But so far they have stayed pretty much open source and the price is dropping like crazy. They are about $1,000 to $3,500. So you're right. This could change the whole game. And if it goes that way, that might change a lot. But
So for the first 20 years of the history of this technology for 3D printing, it was patented, and it was very expensive. As soon as those initial patents expired, you saw this. You saw hobbyists proliferating dozens of designs at a 30th of the cost, and that's how it's really taken off. So that genie is out of the bottle, the very early technology, assuming that there aren't sort of patenting tricks to recapture the public domain, which ought not to succeed, but you don't know.
yeah, thank you. So what I'm suggesting, though, is the shifts in copying technology that disrupted the copyright industry are, in essence, starting to show up in 3D printing, and that they might also disrupt manufacturing and related jobs. So on the one hand, we should be starting to see lower manufacturing costs, the ability to make specialized and just-in-time parts, and some return to local manufacturing might come out. On the other hand, we might also have fewer jobs because of automation, and industries that thrive based on patent rents might no longer be able to do so. So 3D printing in this space, people champion it as innovation, which is, in my opinion, an incredibly dead word, but there it is. But in this space, what might that look like? And I'm suggesting, classic lawyer trick, 3 possibilities. Home, startups, and large factories. So at the home, 3D printing is offering the chance to make items that are not mass-produced. Neil Gershenfeld of MIT, and who's a leader in this space, has called this personal fabrication so that you can make what you can't buy at Walmart. So, for example, the toy industry might actually become, in this crowd it's a little dangerous, but I'll call it, think of it almost like a platform. It becomes the basis for one thing, and what's already happening is hobbyists their kids get bored with Barbie or Ken. And as we know, some of us, Mattel's not very pleased when people mess with their intellectual property. But they're sitting there and they're putting new heads on, new costumes, changing them like crazy. Lego is another example of this possibility. So as a quick little bit, here's something where it's surprisingly good. You get one side was the original and there's the replica. This is interesting because it was all in one print, but as I understand it, this jewelry, each of those little rings actually does move. It was not you had to make them separately and connect them, which just gives you a sense of how powerful the technology is getting. And here's where it gets kind of weird, right? You have a spoon that also has Lego in it, and you can imagine the fun of the fights over that. So given the tendency to share the designs, and that not everyone may have room for a 3D printer, or as you point out, there might be costs or other issues involved, some creators might just sell it directly, in which case you might see sort of this becomes further expansion of the Etsy model. And Etsy, for those of you who don't know, is a marketplace connecting handmade and customized craft makers to consumers. And in that sense, it might be that 3D printing really expands the artisanal, individual part of the economy. But what about startups? Startup firms can use 3D printers and other automated manufacturing to compete with older industrial giants. For example, Local Motors in Chandler, Arizona has used the approach to launch a specialized automaker business. And the business works in part because they actually are crowdsourcing the parts from the maker community. As opposed to the mass production system of other automakers, it's easier to design and test parts using 3D printers and milling machines, and then create parts as needed. And insofar as 3D printers are part of flexible manufacturing, Tesla's approach to automaking is a larger scale example of how the technology is making specialized items, but not having to invest in the large single-purpose production lines, thus sparking a different type of innovation. So here's...
I don't quite understand.
Sure.
You can't take a picture of a car and if you print it, it doesn't drive, right?
No.
So you have to first take the car apart into its million pieces, print all of them, and put it back together.
Very good. That's it. I'm not saying you can actually print the whole car, but what I am saying is this part is becoming easier to design and adapt and make quickly. The capital cost, the old world classic model was you have a big factory, it only has one thing, and so people said, well, I have a patent on that, you need to give me that protection because the investment to make that work. Here, though, a company, this is not Tesla, this is a company called Urbee, has in fact said that this car, the parts are all 3D printed and then they assemble it. That's the difference. So large factory, for instance, to get a little bit closer to what you're saying is, they're able to make runs of one item and then switch the item that they're going to make because of the nature of this. Again, think about the PC. The machine itself is able to simply get new files, new designs, and churn them out one after the other, but they don't have to retool everything to print the next run. So in theory, this should result in need for less labor, and it might move some production to the United States and Europe, whereas previously, because of labor costs, they have been elsewhere. And some of the possible benefits for this would be you get lower inventories, and thus you can address market demands faster. You should be able to save on shipping and related environmental costs. And insofar as there's some threat of IP being taken when it's in a different country, you're keeping it in your own. Now, what was interesting is when Gershenfeld wrote Fab, I think in 2005, there was a line that caught my attention. He said, it's not as though we're printing jet engines with this. Last year, GE Aviation bought Morris Technologies precisely because of their 3D printing and computer milling capabilities, and in fact, wanted it to not only prototype, but be able to make production items for their LEAP jet engine. That's how quickly this technology is moving. So in short, 3D printing seems to promise faster speed to market, lower risk to test new products because a company can test a product without the cost of full-scale production, and might even alter that product based on market testing. The industry can also produce items that are now, previously had been seen, too intricate to be able to machine. So that takes us to guns. I looked for a good picture of the gun stuff, but it all looked like someone might claim that I was infringing copyright, so I haven't put one up. But you know what they look like. So the power to make whatever one wishes poses a problem for regulated industries in general, especially firearms and pharmaceuticals. Oh, as a side note, I just saw a paper that looks like it's from a real scientific journal by, I think it was 2 Scottish scientists who believe that they can take the technology and do chemical compounding. So you can imagine the pharmaceutical industry will pay attention. But sticking with guns, what I'm going to suggest is that understanding the debate over 3D printers and guns will actually reveal the problem that 3D printers pose for patents in general. Okay, the early attempts to print the gun, including the regulated parts, give us a real example of our troubles. It shows us how quickly what was basically printing fantasy becomes reality. And one of the big barriers that went away, has gone away, and that was the cost, time, and skill, right? The machines you needed to make a gun are absolutely gone now. When it first happened a little over a year ago, everyone freaked out, right? At one level, they said, oh, it was only 6 bullets. And then some people said, it was still 6 bullets, right? It's a big deal. But one of the things was the receiver, which is a regulated part that the government says, if you're a gun manufacturer, you're not allowed to sell. It cracked. I'm not positive, but I think because of the press, it seemed like a little bit of a challenge to those guys. March of this year, they put up a video of them firing an AR-15, which is the civilian version of the M16, with the receiver that they had printed, 600 rounds of ammunition, and they said, we would have kept going, we simply ran out of bullets. And in fact, I just saw April 26th, so a few days ago, they are claiming that they expect in a few weeks to be able to have the plan's up for free for anyone to print a fully plastic gun. Okay, so it is regulated if you're a manufacturer, but technically in the US, we're all allowed to do that at home if we feel like it. That may change. But what I think is more interesting here is that the ability to print the regulated parts are already in trouble. Patents can be seen as sort of a subset of trying to regulate anything. So 3D printing as a larger issue is going to affect any field subject to regulation because of public health and safety concerns. For the purposes of the research that my co-author and I are doing, we're trying to say, well, these industries also place their faith in patents. So insofar as 3D printing threatens incumbents, we expect some, perhaps many, are going to look at public safety and health issues, as well as patent arguments to stop or regulate the sector, but for reasons that are not about those issues, but more about protecting their position. So, some legal implications. This could easily need updating, but this is right now what I think are the different vulnerability points if I were to be a counsel and wanted to go after 3D printing. So, the 3D printing world will lead to some patent infringement. And the question is, what will patentees do in the absence of any legislation that stops them? The classic move might be lawsuits against different pieces of this puzzle, right? People who are facilitating the 3D printing go after them. But they're going to have to face the same sort of headwinds that limited the utility of copyright infringement claims filed by music studios against digital distributors of content. My co-author and I believe that a more promising strategy would be to join the 3D revolution and find different ways to leverage their current position. Nonetheless, before we get to that, where might they sue? Do you have a question?
I had a little bit. I think that patents present a much more difficult a barrier to lawsuits than copyright infringement. Copyright infringement, the actual file had to be transferred. Here, you're transferring instructions. You're going to have to go through some contributory argument, and that's going to be hard, much harder, I think.
I didn't pay him, but I was going to say, where might they attack? And the two angles will be contributory infringement or active inducement. So yes, tell me if you think I get it wrong, but I'm with you so far. All right, so one place that you might go is go after the hardware, right? And that would be the 3D printer makers, or probably something I should add in here, you could try and claim the scanners or other things. But again, these are general purpose devices. It should be a non-starter. In fact, I promise not too much heavy on law because there's only a few lawyers in the audience and we can get deadly boring arguing about what the code says.
Is that true? Because the regulators were very successful in forcing the hardware to put sort of copyright protection into DVD.
DRM, yes, digital rights management. They were successful, I would say, insofar as, yeah, it happened. But notice, and I will get to this in a moment, in reality, most of the big makers have given up on DRM. Apple got rid of it. Just the other day, Tor and a few other big publishers have said no more DRM on our books. So yes, they were able to go that route. And part of my co-author and I, what we're trying to say is we could follow that path again. It would be a waste of time. It has not worked well in the other areas. And instead, when the industries have adapted and addressed the issue of, well, that sort of lockup, look, engineers crack things, right? They're going to break it again. It's an open system. And I think a little bit of what David was getting at, if you remember with the scanning technology, I don't know how you can get DRM to stop. It's not the same concept anymore.
Different problem. Here, what you're doing is you're building a patented device where once you do that, you violated the patent.
Right.
You're not making a copy of somebody else's file, which is what happens in copyright.
So let me go a little further. If I haven't finished answering it, let me know. But all right, so the first concept, we stick with the hardware. The concept here that maybe the printers or the accessories are covered by the provision. The problem is we're not going to be able to prove, right, if you want to go after them, that this is a device that is not suitable for substantial non-infringing use, right? I hope I've made that case pretty clear. There's so many non-infringing uses for 3D printer that it should be a no-brainer for any court. In fact, if we think about the big case here in the copyright world, which in fact borrowed that concept out of patent law, which is the Sony case, come on, compared to a VCR, this thing has got way more non-infringing uses. So there's that. They could say that the key players in 3D printing are actively inducing infringement. Again, only if they're idiots, right? At this point, it's so obvious what that's going to look like. If you specifically made one of those printers I put up there, or a scanner, and said, infringe patents, and entertain your friends, yes, we're going to come after you. But it's too easy to say, this has so many cool devices, that things you do. Do not be Grokster or Napster and tell people, hey, we're going to be a repository where you can use our device to infringe. So, I mean, really, you'd be quite foolish, and if a company does that, fine, sue them out of existence, call it, sort of Darwinian self-selection, and move along. Others won't make that mistake.
In the general case, that's right, if you're talking about just patents generally, but you can imagine a seller of a 3D printer says, look at these cool things you can do with the 3D printer, and then anyone with a patent covering one of those implementations that's used in the marketing would have an argument for.
So you'd have to be a little careful. Yeah. Yes, I'm with you. Yeah. Right, that's where you would see someone at least throw some darts or take some pot shots at that. I'm totally with you on that. You have to be careful on what you say it can do. Absolutely. All right, so let's think a little bit of the software and the sites that host the files that give us the instructions. All right, you could prevent it, right? If you could lock it down as you're describing, this would make the patent industry extremely excited. In fact, I don't know if you've noticed this already, but Nathan Myhrvold has obtained, did he get it, the patent? On DRM. He has, in fact, gone out and gotten a patent to try and install a digital rights management system for 3D printers. No one that I know, at least, is thrilled by this. I don't think it's a wise strategy, but that would be one angle. But the other issue here is when you had those claims in the other worlds, right? Napster for music, eBay for counterfeits. Court said that if you were the website, you would be liable for contributory or copyright or trademark infringement if you had knowledge that what you were doing was illegal. So you might think a website that serves as a conduit should be liable for contributory infringement if it doesn't take down the file after receiving a plausible complaint from a patentee. In fact, by the way, a couple sites are already doing a version of that without the law pushing them into it. Thingiverse and I believe Shapeways have notice and takedown policies that track the DMCA process. But the contributory patent infringement claims against the website could be rejected because the language of the statute doesn't seem to cover that software. The portion of the section that could apply to 3D printing files is the text stating a component of a patent cannot be used to infringe. But in a slightly different part of the statute, the Supreme Court in 2007 said that the term component addressed patented objects that are assembled entirely or partly abroad doesn't include software unconnected to hardware. This makes some sense. Here's why. The analogy here is that the software is actually a blueprint. And the blueprint may contain precise instructions for the construction and combination of the components of a patented device, but is itself not the combinable component of the device. And this makes sense. Patents are supposed to be the instructions on how to make the item. That's part of the patent bargain, ostensibly. But nobody thinks then that just posting that file is an infringing act. Now, it's not all rosy here. There are possibilities that the court could read the word component more broadly in going back to this part of the statute instead of the case in 2007. And that's one possibility. The other part is that the court's construction of component in that was from a utility patent case, and we also have to deal with design patents. So 3D printed fashion or other objects are not covered by copyright and might be distinguished. This leads us to a little diversion. All right, so a little side note. Just getting into design patents myself, and I'll tell you this. Obviously, Apple v. Samsung, for those who have followed it, brings this design patents to the forefront. I was just at a conference at Stanford about design patents with some very smart people, and the only thing I could tell is it's a ridiculous part of the law. It shouldn't exist, but it's there. It traces to a very odd legal moment, a moment in legal history. Late 1800s, early 1900s, there was no trade dress protection, and basically my argument, though I have to do a little research to support it, is industries that relied on design went and said, you need to give us this protection, and they got it. The new technology, I think, further reveals how dubious these laws are. Now, one of the strange things that I learned was one of the early cases had to do with, believe it or not, a spoon and a little cool trill on the handle of a spoon. Total design. And if you reproduced it, you infringed. All right, so spoons. Now, that's pretty ugly. It's not very sophisticated. You may not care, but it is someone's head attached to a spoon. There's some design stuff there. You may think that'll never touch someone's design patent. What about that? That one could get closer and be pretty easy to copy. And then our old friend from before. So
utility.
It's got utility.
So I don't know whether you get a design patent.
Well, yeah, so design patents, we could go way into, well, what is it, the part, and it's only ornamental? Is it utility because I can snap other Legos to this? I don't know. But you're right, you get some mixes. But here's some other ones just to give you more sense. So this was not, granted, it's not a 3D printer, but it is the larger world of CNC or computer numerical control. This is a fairly important design, and a lot of design patents are about chairs. The egg chair. Now, this was only at scale, right? Another famous chair.
No, but for furniture, this is old, right? I mean, at least since 10 years,
Yeah.
a lot of furniture is produced by sort of machines where you submit a CD and they make sort of the parts of a bookshelf or a
Sure.
bed or whatever. So
Yes, but this is what is that. So that goes back to the computer control stuff, right? But this again becomes, those tend to be bigger machines. You're not as likely to see them in the home. What's curious, and granted, you might say it's a little sci-fi of me, but this is the one that caught my attention. The claim for this file, when they called it parametric, which I don't think is necessarily how that word works, but I'll defer to the owners of the file, was that this set of files would allow you to make these beds and chairs from the tiny to the full size as long as you had a big enough machine, right? So that's where if you had designs, right, those other ones were at small scale, but this suggests that if you've got anything that's subject to a design patent, you could take your pictures, you could arguably rip it off or at least make a copy, and you'd be good to go. So getting back to contributory infringement, let's say you bring that suit against the website. The patentee still has to figure out what is infringing and identify it. You're going to have to locate the potentially infringing 3D files, see what they make, decide if the end result is infringing, and that's pretty onerous. And things are even worse, or at least as bad, if you're the website. The digital intermediary is going to be incapable of making judgments about patent infringement when we consider that lawyers and engineers have no clue as it is, or at least often. Removing any file when a patentee raises a complaint that the resulting product is too similar to its patent is unrealistic, because this would basically drive users off the website, or perhaps to what patentees might care about more, a full-on distributed peer-to-peer system for these files as well. Moreover, it's unclear whether a claim that a 3D printer file would produce something that might be infringing is specific enough to give that site the liability under contributory infringement standards, at least as they've been set out so far for copyright and trademark. So even if the patentee worked hard to locate the files, the notice would probably not result in much of a response from the websites. So if the patentees are then unable to stop the widespread infringement by 3D printers, their best fallback might be to embrace the change in production and cultivate new markets. So possibly, just like movie studios found a way to make money from DVDs, even though home viewership cannibalized revenue, it could be that patentees could profit from the growth in home manufacturing. This is a way out there hypothesis. I don't know. But one concept here is, think about the fact that the machines are expensive at one level, even if they come down in price, and we may not want them all the time. But if we do want to use this, perhaps the brand itself could be a lever to help the patentee. In other words, I might be happier getting the Mattel doll or the Lego piece, knowing that the file was clean and came from the original company. In addition, they might give authorized or certified the plastic, et cetera, so that my kid may not be hurt, that the colors don't have something else going on. There's a whole world here where this could all work out relatively well, and the big entities would actually move to use trademark to give the quality assurance that we would otherwise be running up against if we just get the file from anyone. End users, in that sense, might be wanting to get their inputs from an established brand where there's customer service and liability issues where you can go to them and say, hey, this didn't work, rather than the unknown author or plastic from a local shop. So when patentees enter the 3D market, they're going to have to resign themselves to the fact that their software won't be patentable, right? They're going to need, this is where they might demand the DRM for these other option, even if they go this other route, because they'll say, oh, my official file was copied. But right now, what I've said so far is patent infringement is way more complex than copyright or trademark infringement, and the legal theories that were not effective in slowing the online distribution of music or counterfeits are less likely to work in this space. So the patentees have a couple options. Hopefully they'll be nimble and pursue the new strategies, unless Congress bails them out with some new statutes to restrict it. At the same time, we could see a demand for DRM. What my colleague and I are going to propose is this. There are a couple things that Congress might want to do to try and find a middle ground here. First, it might be needed to have an infringement exemption for personal 3D printing, so it would not affect large-scale production. An obstacle to the growth of 3D printing is that those who engage in that activity are going to be strictly liable if you infringe the patent. So chances that a person might be sued for direct infringement are low. There's nonetheless a potential chilling effect on those who are risk-averse or think it's immoral to break the law because it is the law. So a sophisticated firm might fail to find patents that conflict with their work, and there might be little hope that the average individual or small business can navigate the minefield and be sure they are not infringing. So it's unclear why production at home for purely personal use should be unlawful, especially given that enforcement is futile. The norm of benign neglect for 3D infringement might work, but it's not the same as saying, let's create a legal carve-out. Congress, until now, had not had to do that because personal production from patent remedies, because it was very difficult to make the patent devices at home. But the physical limit is eroding. Maintaining a liability standard created for another age may not make sense here. Given the interest and complex questions involved with the area, we're suggesting that the best solution, should Congress try and do something, is to create this home immunity from liability and set a pretty high minimum for controversy before you can get into court.
So I want to bring you back to what you said, that guns would be the test case. So you suggest that Congress make it legal to copy a gun for your private use.
It's already legal, by the way. Welcome to America. But that, believe it or not, if you wanted it right now to take a milling machine, et cetera, it is not illegal for you to make the gun at home. As far as I've been able to tell, this is all perfectly legal. It's illegal for you to be a large-scale manufacturer. So it's already the case.
I can't buy it without a license, but I can make it without a license as a home user.
But you can't take it out of your house. You can make it, you can keep it in your house, you can't walk out the door.
Is that right, David? You can't shoot it off at a range?
But in general, for example, in Massachusetts, you need a license to have a handgun. Actually, you need it for a long gun.
So you can't go get the license even if you made it yourself?
Well, you can. You can go get the license. Sure.
Okay.
But then you've got a license.
Right.
You're saying for unlicensed guns,
Oh, I see. Yeah.
you built it in your basement, but you can't go walking outside of it without a license.
Right. So there's a couple different things here, right? So one was there are regulations. The government regulates the manufacture of guns if you are an overall seller. This is a different question in my mind, which is, nonetheless, if you print it at home, to be legal, in addition, you will probably have to comply with the local licensing laws, but that's a separate question to me.
And if you were to build a gun, for example, if you build a shotgun with a 12-inch barrel, that would still be an illegal gun. If you build an automatic repeating gun,
Right.
a machine gun,
Right.
that would still be illegal.
That's right. That's right.
So
It's
you
the
have to build a legal gun
That's
for
right.
it to be legal.
That's absolutely right. But the interesting question is, the real analog to me is, we can talk about you're not supposed to do X, but they can still do X, as you said. And if they are in their basement, who knows?
By the way, one thing you're missing,
Yeah.
because this is where I think 3D printing is going, is there's the nerds that will build the RepRap, build a $1,000 or $3,000 printing. But what's really going to happen,
Yeah.
and it already has happened, in Central Square, there's a laser cutting service bureau. You can go in and get all sorts of cute laser stuff. My guess is what you're going to have is neighborhood 3D printing,
Yes.
just like you have at Kinko's.
Yes.
And you might want to think how this all applies to that service bureau industry, because of course that they have a different set of incentives not to.
No, that's why I was saying is I think what might happen in the middle is what I was talking about. Okay, so wasn't really getting into it with this version of the presentation, but I'm with you. So think about it. What makes more sense, rather than us sitting at home with this, is if there are basically an app store,
Yeah.
right? So I think this is where Amazon and Walmart should head, and most likely will. Amazon has become very much about on-demand consumption despite wherever they are. So they now try and have local distribution. And for specialized goods, I think they would do this for you without a doubt. And they'd have the scale to do it. And they'd say, fine, you want your file? We'll print it and have it ready for you tomorrow. Kinko's and others might get into this. I think Walmart, if you really think about Walmart's model, which is just in time, right? I mean, the real genius of Walmart, by the way, is they're a warehouse, right? Their system is designed so that the local customer is driving that process so that the goods hit that shelf and move within a day. And so if you're the person who sells through Walmart, Walmart's making tremendous money because their inventory is never on the shelf. This could work the same way, right?
I mean, there's already mail-order 3D printing bureaus.
Right, absolutely.
I think Amazon, to me, if they're going to be building the local stores for same-day delivery, it would make
I
plenty of
gotta believe
sense.
Bezos is so smart,
Yeah.
he's already on this.
And the problem with the home systems is they're, 5 by 5 by 5.
Yep.
You're really limited. But once you have an industrial system
Sure.
that can do sintered metal, I mean, you have a really neat system. And I think that there you're much more likely to have some sort of a relationship where patentees can, a DMCA-like system.
Or just at that point, again, they're going to be so out in the open, it won't be worth it to them to necessarily infringe. But the question might be, if you go to them and give them a file, do they have to police your file? And I don't think they should have to. That's, again, the same issue.
And if I send one file to one manufacturer, one to another, and they all come together, first of all, they're not patented yet until I put them together.
Yes, and so this is the other part of the I don't know if you looked at the Akamai case.
Yeah. I actually wrote the original
Did you
decision. I was clerking for Judge Zobel and
Oh.
did the first draft for her.
Okay,
So I'm
then.
pretty
So
familiar.
you know it quite well. Well, I mean, you tell me. How about the latest iteration from the Fed Circuit?
They got it so screwed up.
Okay, so as someone who, again, doesn't always track the patent side, that's my co-author, good. I thought I missed something. I was like, is that really what they said? And wow, it's out there.
One of the things they didn't say a lot of stuff. They didn't really say what the standard is if you are giving someone the tools to
Right.
make a patented. Now, the thing you have to remember is Limelight did not believe what they were doing violated the
Of course.
patent. So, is it strict liability under this new theory where you don't even have to do it all yourself? Do you have to? What the decision says is you have to know there's a patent. And so, if you give all the pieces to someone else and they do the last piece before this decision, that wasn't patent infringement because one entity had to do the whole thing.
Right.
Now, the argument is, well, if you know it's patented, then you can be responsible even if someone else does part of it. But they didn't make it clear whether you had to know it was patented and believe that
Right.
what you're doing infringed the patent or not.
Yeah.
So what's the
So
culpability?
to back it out for everyone who's perhaps now, even though I swore we weren't going to try and get too into to the nitty gritty, I did. It's my fault. As the lawyers would say, I opened the door and it's my fault. But roughly speaking, what the case started to say was, hey, correct me if I misstate this. If you basically set it up where you're like, hey, look, this piece and this piece and this piece are all okay. Go put it together. You could now be in trouble, in simplest terms. And this was a shift, a big shift. But the other piece was this question of knowing that what you were doing was also going to infringe at all. And it's up for cert, right?
What?
Is it up for cert, I think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I'm hoping.
Yeah. So it might go to the Supreme Court because it is a relatively new interpretation. But there's also a question of whether...
5 to 6 end by decision,
Right.
which suggests that there wasn't a lot of certainty.
Right. But then getting back to this, then the other concept that we suggest might work is, believe it or not, maybe something like the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, but for patents. And a lot of people hate the DMCA. I think the DMCA has worked out a lot better than people have realized it
The
might.
fact that everybody hates it suggests it works.
Yes, I'm with you. I in fact said that a few years ago when I was doing some work at Google, where I said, this actually means that neither side is happy and both sides have to come up with something that works, which was you can't be too complacent if you're on the, oh, you might be infringing side, because the copyright industry was still able to come knocking and say, what are you doing? And so one thing that was kind of interesting is Content ID was pretty interesting market outcome. May not be the best outcome for all issues, but in that situation, the music industry gave digital fingerprints to YouTube, and now if you upload a song and it looks like it infringes, the alleged owner gets a notice, they have to still do some legwork, and then they can choose if they want to send a takedown notice, or, it turns out, They may want to monetize it by putting up ads and actually saying, buy the original here. The harder part with patent is kind of interesting here, right? I don't think it will work as well to be able, you can't do that sort of digital fingerprinting maybe yet. Who knows? The weird outcome of this is maybe we'll get better patent claims and, in fact, better files that you would have to upload your file for the patent so you could actually cross-reference better. And it might be that machine learning techniques and a couple other cool things will actually allow you to compare a database of my file versus the original to say, this looks like it might be infringing. I mean, my guess is that will take 10, 20 years, but who knows? The other piece of the puzzle here is patent is strict liability. There's no fair use. So the interesting question about the DMCA was, well, there's a fuzzy world of copyright where maybe I'm using it expressively, maybe not. The weird part for patent is either you've infringed or you haven't. You don't actually get an expressive right to patents. Now, I'm guessing that as I say this, there might be my colleagues in legal academia who are running around thinking, yeah, we should argue about what would expressive patent rights look like. Certainly Gershenfeld has talked about 3D printing as an expressive act, and I found it rather persuasive. I don't think the law is ready to think about that, but that's why professors get to write too, right?
Well, but I think the analogy is to the I don't infringe copyright because it's fair use. Is I don't infringe because I don't infringe the patent.
Right. But and so it should be even less the issue, I think, really, because unless you can really show this was a straight up infringement, you don't have that same interest at all, and so it should be less of an issue because there's, as you said, it's more binary, at least in patent. All right, so quick wrap up, as it were, was here's my basic claim again. 3D printing is the next step in general purpose computing. The activities that used to be the province of only a few players are in the hands of the many. The patent system has arguably been able to require disclosure of how the process works because the cost to infringe was high. Now, the cost structures that required an inventor to find a deep pocket outside backer are gone. Design, manufacture, distribution of goods is easier, faster, less expensive than ever before. And the tasks that can be done by someone at home in a startup, these tasks can be done in home, startups, or large business. So patent law and industries that rely on patents are going to have to adapt to the new environment or probably face a type of obsolescence. The disruptive power of 3D printing and large swaths of the economy affected by 3D printing means it'll take just one or two industry players to try and force a repeat of the mistake of the copyright wars instead of learning from them. So instead of trying to follow the copyright industry's strategy of seeking new laws to prosecute any and all who use the technology to infringe a patent, and instead of demanding technological solutions similar to DRM tactics deployed by the copyright industry, and instead of attacking intermediaries who provide the files for potential infringement, we should realize that those all failed. Books, music, film, these industries have started to give up on those strategies, have started to embrace digital distribution, and are starting to make big profits. 3D printing should be lightly regulated. It's enabling exactly the sort of creation and progress of science and the useful arts that intellectual property is supposed to foster. The locus of that work might shift. That doesn't diminish, however, that progress is occurring and it's often faster and at less cost. The dawn of the web increased and revealed the scale at which individuals and businesses engaged with, shared, and used copyrighted or trademarked intellectual property. At scale, the old models of enforcement and what constituted infringement had to be rethought. To have even a chance for the PC and the web to grow and thrive, the specter of copyright lawsuits or trademark lawsuits had to be mitigated. 3D printing raises similar challenges, and the largest threats comes from a fair amount of uncertainty in the law. Trying to stop or dictate the way a 3D printer should be used is a bad idea. It would unduly limit the potential of a general-purpose machine and mimic the failed DRM ideas of the copyright industry. But if we have to do anything, we might want to revise the patent law to increase the to create a high minimum amount in controversy to at least get a de facto fair use standard for home and experimental use, and contemplate a DMCA, but for patents, to open the door to these files being able to be shared and played with. In that sense, we should be able to see more sharing, remixing, and selling of the IP, just like we did in copyright, but now in patent. Without these changes, 3D printing could become mired in fights over protecting old business models. Mistaken regulation could fall into path-dependent solutions where creators are told to use a 3D printer for only certain purposes. As a footnote, that irony of that would be that the original world of computer-aided design used what was called the dreaded dongle, which was an old DRM licensing system. So we would be going backwards in time to a system that is already proven extremely poor by very smart people just down the road from here. And the proposed changes, at least what we think or hope, should balance interest and create some space for 3D printing to become a foundation for a new wave of general purpose computing and creation. And with that, I am, in fact, out of words for the moment, but lay it on me. Any other things that I've confused you on? Or? Oh, thank you. Yes?
So as far as the law goes, like, it seems to me totally impractical to go after home users, but if someone successfully went after a home user, would you expect that the damages would just be the cost of licensing their patent originally? I mean, in addition to having to find out that somebody used it at home, what would be the benefit that the person would get from suing?
This is the beauty of having a co-author. I can point out that he's the patent expert. But does anyone remember, what are the statutory damages? I don't even know right now.
There aren't any.
They're right.
It's
The
actually, it's a
damages,
reasonable royalty.
if the person just
Right.
built the thing,
Okay.
then it would be reasonable royalty. If they uploaded the file,
Yeah.
if they designed it and uploaded the file, then you get into the economic damages, standard economic damages theory.
Right.
The more significant cost would be the legal fees of the defense. So like the standard patent troll business model of settling for nuisance value, because actually litigating a patent case can cost millions of dollars.
Yeah.
2 to 10 is the usual assumption for a patent case.
At least for large. So yeah, it sounds like the RIAA model doesn't really work for the home.
The RA model only works because of statutory
Because of
damage.
statutory damage. And actually,
And here, you
Pam
just
Samuelson's
have,
been doing some
you
really
know,
good
you
work
have the
pointing out.
license fee for a
Yeah.
one-of, and,
Yeah.
and the real problem would be somebody who designed the thing and uploaded
Right.
it, not knowing it was patented, which
Right.
is one of the problems is because it's strict liability.
Yep.
Hey, here's a cool thing I
You're done.
designed. Upload it, then that person is. But once again, they're probably judgment-proof. So there's a whole bunch of problems against
Yeah.
going individual users.
What does it mean to be judgment-proof?
It means you get a $20 million judgment and you have $10 in your savings account. So it doesn't really do the person who got the $20 million judgment much good to have spent $5 million to get that.
If their objective is to make money as
If their
opposed to
objective
terrorize
is, right, if
people.
their objective is to terrorize people, it works. But
Okay.
So practically, it's a practical
and
judgment proof.
The RIA suits were not about. They don't really expect to get $1 million out of Jamie. What's
Thomas.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and they don't expect to get the $670,000 out of this guy here. It's all about, and they spent a lot more than that. It's all about publicity. On the other hand, there's a whole series of lawsuits against individual downloaders of movies which offer to settle for $1,500, $3,500. That's about making money, and the assumption is somebody can come up with that. But if you go after someone and get a big judgment and they can't
That's
pay
to
it,
scare people.
declare bankruptcy, you only do that if you're trying to scare other people away.
Yeah. Which, there's been
Could be.
some areas where that has worked. I think there's some evidence that people now are sort of, oh, well, maybe that's illegal. But at the same time, where I don't know, I assume, I don't know if I should even assume, but I would bet that if you could do an empirical study, that a lot of that stuff has just gone peer-to-peer. Because then you can't even find them, at least.
Peer-to-peer is actually pretty easy to find.
Through what?
Direct download is
Through
hard.
packets?
Oh, yeah,
Exposure
Yeah,
Peer-to-peer
okay,
is-
so it's the
all
direct.
the movie lawsuits are through peer-to-peer. Peer-to-peer is fairly easy to tell what people are doing.
Okay.
And it's direct downloads from Mega Uploader,
Ah.
who's still around, that those are fairly difficult, which is why they go after the
So
site itself.
peer-to-peer hasn't gone to sort of a full mesh where it's really hard to track you?
It's really easy.
There are private networks,
They're
there are
private,
VPN
yeah.
services you can use to mask your IP, but if you're
But
just
people
on
don't.
if you're just on a general, torrent
Yeah.
without being part of a special
Okay.
piracy community, then you're
I guess
exposed
I
to
gave them more credit.
everybody.
I figured they'd take advantage of all the ways to hide, but I was wrong.
Most people don't even think about what they're doing. This is a great way to get music. They don't
Right.
think about that. or
Fair
movie.
enough.
They don't think about the fact that and they have no idea the technology, so they don't realize that they're totally exposed.
Right. Other questions? Yes?
So what about going the other way and say you are actually copying, so you violate copyright?
If it's covered by copyright, so statuettes, things like that, would be implicated, absolutely. And the answer to that would be,
And the BMW may have trademark.
yeah, we were talking about, so the trademark itself,
I mean, I can imagine I had to buy a replacement BMW grill.
Yep.
Which, by the way, is made by a lot of third parties,
Oh, yeah.
super cheap.
Oh yeah.
You know, so I don't know that 3D printing is really going to change anything. But theoretically, that's the trademark part.
Absolutely. Or, the simple version. What if you make a toy and there's some trade dress or trademark combos on there and, someone says, I don't, exactly. Well, Disney now, I guess, since I think they just bought the Star Wars franchise, they're not known to be so generous about how people, and no company is. I mean, honestly, it is valuable, and so if they see that as, there's a whole bunch of problems. One, if they come up with a ridiculous idea, in my opinion, that's some sort of naked licensing, they could theoretically be told, oh, you didn't police your mark, you have to go after them. And I've actually written about why that's a really dumb model, that this isn't the sort of use that you should consider a naked license, because it's just not. Now, if they start making it at home and selling it, well, yeah, they probably will have to go after that.
The law he's talking about is the reason elevator, which supposedly is a trademark, isn't.
Yes.
Supposedly, if you come up with a lift and decide to call it elevator and somebody else calls theirs elevator and you don't do anything about it, it becomes a generic word.
Yeah. There are a whole bunch of reasons that law actually has another deep relationship to patent law, it turns out, as well. The original cases had to do with the patentee had exclusive use of the term and the technology. So when it came time for someone to compete, I think those early decisions were fairly sophisticated about saying, the problem is your monopoly on that thing has gone. We're not going to let you stop consumers from using that term, and or competitors. They have to be able to reach them. But today, again, it's sort of like when we were talking about how absurd it would be to go, hey, come actively and infringe with me. Marketing groups are smart enough that they should always come up with a suitable, but maybe not perfect or great. So TiVo, right? That's why you have to have DVR, because someone can use DVR, and TiVo is TiVo, right? Rollerblade, inline skates, that one's probably a little dicier, but still, at least if you deploy that, I personally think that I can understand a court saying no one else can call it X because you put in the time to market it, so be it. But without it, then yes, you get into this weird world where enough people use it, it becomes the term that everyone uses, and in theory it's generic, and it's called genericide. It's sort of, you killed your brand or your mark. Okay.
So one of the things that struck me that you mentioned was that sites like Thingiverse are complying with patent law, and I was wondering why they were doing that, if they were doing it because they were worried about being sued, or if it was more of like a moral thing, as in they're trying to respect the rights of the designer. Because this is a really interesting space, right? You have like artists who are doing their own thing, and you have like the artist rights kind of, people should get money for their IP, and then you have the open source people who are kind of like, yes, we should be distributing stuff. So where do you think, where does a site like Thingiverse fall on the moral spectrum of that?
Yeah, so from what I can tell, their notice and takedown was, I think, partially to be safe if they got a clean notice that there was an infringement issue. But some of it has been moral, but mainly because of the gun stuff, right? They've gone after, I think, MakerBot, or no, was it Stratasys? One of them said, in terms of those of you interested in this space at a larger issue, that technically their machines were only licensed, and that they were, I think they tried to pull.
It's a clear lease. It's
yeah.
Not, they're not in the position of saying, that thing you thought we sold you
right.
was only a lease. It was clearly a lease.
But the lease terms had this moral thing.
And they yanked it back from the group that was doing the gun printing.
Right, so, but it was basically a morals type clause. You cannot do things that are illegal and or make guns. And once they found out they were, they said, great, you violated the terms of the lease. We'll take that back. Thank you very much. The Thingiverse, now Thingiverse, as I understand it, is actually owned by MakerBot. So I'm not positive as to what the intent there was, but I think they probably had some smart lawyers, and part of it was, if we get a clear one, we want to be able to be set up well to say, hey, we've tried to do in good faith. If you guys say it's a problem, we're done. We're taking it off. At the same time, I don't know if they have any morals. Oh, actually, no, they removed the gun parts, too. I thought I read that. And I assume that is PR, right? I mean, they just, combination.
But the problem is, of course, removing patented items doesn't immunize you the way it does on copyright under DMCA, but it makes perfect sense that if you follow the DMC model, you're much better protected particularly if it's a contributory argument, which is all as it can be.
Right.
It's hard to imagine you could win a contributory argument when you have a DMCA type.
Right.
setup.
Right. But to Kate's point, in terms of the exact motivation, I'm not positive. But I did find it curious that in some cases it was a morals question. Now, the morals question gets kind of funky, though, right? Think about there are bongs, which technically, you know, go into any head shop and they're never supposed to say it's for anything other than tobacco. You know, I don't know if they're going to try and police that. And frankly, sex toys, right? 3D printing all over the place for them, but there are some states where I think they're still not supposed to be sold. I don't know where that's going to go, and whether places like Thingiverse is going. What?
Alabama.
Yeah, but I'm pretty certain it was Alabama.
They just changed the law, but maybe not. I remember something recent. One of the other states.
Why can only be used in heterosexual parents?
But yeah, no. Last I heard, it was Alabama, but I had heard they were thinking about changing it finally, but I don't know that happened. But as an example, anyway, those would be two items, or at least one, where I don't know if Thingiverse is going to say we will call that illegal or we disapprove, and you know. And this is the weird part, I think, with intermediary liability in general, is as you start to exert some sense of this is how we look at it, courts say, well, you started to manage, you started to police, and so now you're more responsible because you had the right to do that, which is, you know, if I remember correctly, this is part of the reason the DMCA is at least kind of a nice compromise of, okay, we're not going to hold you liable if you sort of in good faith respond, and in fact, I think if I remember, there's some carve-outs that if you set up some good morals, we're not going to hold that against you. It's actually sort of an old tort concept, right? Which is if you fixed the stairway after someone fell, we're not going to say that's evidence that you were at fault to begin with. So I think we'll see more of that here, and the question will be, you know, exactly why? Not so clear. But in terms of a nice balance, I think it actually can end up being pretty well balanced. So, other questions? It is 5. I don't want to keep people away from snacks and drinks, but. And I'll be at snacks and drinks for a bit, so you know you can bother me there. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.